this. All right. Now let's get on to the show. We are talking about options today. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over to this presentation. Almost there. There we go. Looks good. The anatomy of stock options, contracts to buy and sell stock at a price by a time. That's essentially what a stock option is. It is a legally binding contract that you can either, and it represents an underlying stock. That's a term of art that they use, the underlying. And that contract gives you the right to buy or sell, depending on whether it's a call or a put, a stock at a specific price, also called a strike price, by a certain time, also called the expiration. Now, if you're wondering what that might look like, here's a screenshot of Apple and all the different Apple options that are available. Right now, we're looking at the contract that expires on the last week of September. This is called a weekly option. There are weekly and monthly options. Weeklies expire every week. Monthlies, I'll get into that in a second. But this list here that you see with the multicolor, you see blue and black, and then black and blue. On the left-hand side are calls, and the right-hand side are puts. And in the blue part means that it's in the money. That means it has intrinsic value, and we'll go over all of this. And the black part means it's out of the money. Same thing with the puts. You see the strike price down the middle, etc. So that's showing the weekly. Then you see different weeklies, and then the ones that doesn't say weekly, those are monthlies. And so that's it for that. All right. So now we'll get into some of that's basically what most trading platforms look like. Thinkorswim has quite a bit more features and much more mature than most other platforms. So I recommend it very highly. All right, so what is an option? Again, an option is a legally binding contract, like any other contract that you enter into in the United States. It's a United States contract. So if you're going to buy a house or buy insurance or go into business, all of those are contracts that are bound by contract law in the United States. They have certain, the buyers of those contracts have certain rights described within that contract, and the seller has certain obligations. All right. So a stock option is no different. It's a legally binding contract to buy or sell 100 shares of stock. There are things called mini options, and instead of 100 shares, there are 10 shares. There's only a few stocks that have that capability. Apple is one of them. To buy or sell 100 shares of stock at a specific price, also known as the strike price, by a certain time, also known as the expiration date. So the expiration, when does the expiration happen? It happens the Saturday after the third Friday. Now, this is for monthly options. The Saturday after the third Friday of the month. Now, of course, nobody's trading on Saturday. And so I guess technically the option expires on Saturday at 5 p.m. Eastern time. But in reality, it really expires the Friday before, that Friday, the last business day, at about 5:30, because that's the last time that you can actually execute a trade. Now, weekly options, they expire every Friday. Now, option holders, those are the people that had bought the option, must exercise their option by 5:30 Eastern, the first business day prior to expiration. So that's what I'm saying here. That's the Friday, 5:30 Eastern time. The strike price, what is that strike price? The strike price is the price at which the buyer can buy the underlying stock during the life of the option or before the option has expired. And the seller can sell prior to that time. All right. So the strike price is very important to an option. That's part of the contract configuration. It has certain obligations, certain things that you can do, and rights that confer it to the buyer, and obligations that are conferred to the seller. And the contract says that you can either buy or sell a stock or the underlying by a certain time. That is essentially what an option is. Now, options, the pricing and everything, we'll get into that. But in general, you're spending a little bit of money to control 100 shares of stock, or 10 shares if it's a mini option. Now, that little bit of money can vary widely based on a whole bunch of things, and that's the stuff that we're going to talk about next. All right. No questions so far. Wow, got through one slide with no questions. So what does it mean to exercise the stock? A lot of people have heard that term. Now, under the terms of the contract, this is the right of the holder of the option to buy the stock at the strike for a call option, or the right to sell a stock at the strike for a put option. So calls are basically for going long a stock, and puts are for basically going short a stock. And to exercise means that you can either buy the stock at that price or sell the stock at that price, depending on whether it's a call or a put, before the option has expired. So during the term of the contract, you get that right as a buyer. So to exercise a buy or a sell, how do you do it? Well, it's pretty much you go to your trading platform and you click a button or a link. That's pretty much what you're doing. So you click you click the button on your trading platform, and that will then set off a whole series of events that will initiate your broker of your intention, and then there's a bunch of things that go on behind the scenes that we'll talk about in future videos. But that is basically how you do it. It's not much different than when you buy or sell a stock. You know, you click a buy or a sell button. Here, you're either buying or selling an option. Now, the interface and the details, or how you construct that, is much more complex than buying a stock. So it's a little bit more involved than just that, but it's essentially that. If I wanted to buy a stock, I basically go to a link or click a button. Now, some of you may have heard of the term assignment. What does assignment mean? Assignment is only for people who sell options. Exercising is for buyers. So buyers exercise their contract. Sellers can get assigned stock based on what the buyer does. So you can be on either side of either buying or selling a stock option. And now, if you're a buyer, you have certain rights, like if you bought another type of contract somewhere. If you're a seller, you have certain obligations that you have to fulfill if the buyer chooses to act on those rights. Assignment means that you get assigned either long or short shares of a stock if the buyer chooses to exercise their rights under the contract. And this can happen at any time. Now, the powers that be don't necessarily match everybody up exactly with the buy side and the sell side. There's kind of a clearinghouse, and they decide, and it's more of a random process, that if somebody decides to exercise stock, they have to pick somebody that is the seller of that same contract, and then you can get assigned. And that means that they'll wipe out the option and either place long stock or short stock in your account. Now, of course, in order to do that, you have to have enough capital and margin and able to hold that option. If you don't, then we could have a problem. All right. Now, here's some other terms that you've probably heard. You've heard you can either be at the money, in the money, or out of the money. And in stock option parlance that's usually done with a three-letter acronym. It's not really an acronym, but 3 letters, either ATM, which is at the money, ITM, which is in the money, or OTM, which is out of the money. Now, what do they mean? When you're at the money, that's when the option strike price is the same as the stock price. So remember, we saw this here. If I were to buy an option, and let's say the stock price is at, well, right now it's at 222, according to this here. All right, and here is 222 right here. If I bought this option right here on this line, that would be at the money. All right, and if I bought this call option, that would be at the money. If I bought this put option, that would be at the money. So it's buying at the money is the contract. Each one of these lines represents a contract. Each one of these records in here. Calls on this side, puts on the right side. Each line is a separate contract. And if I buy it at that strike price, that would mean I bought it at the money. Pretty simple, but important that you understand that. In the money is when the option has intrinsic value. And I'll describe that in the next slide, what intrinsic value is. But that means that without any kind of time-based value or extra premium, the intrinsic value means that if you were to exercise that stock, or if it went to expiration, that option would actually have value, which also means that options can expire without any value, which is an important point. Out of the money is when the option has no intrinsic value. Now, intrinsic, there are 2 parts of value to an option. There's intrinsic and extrinsic, and we're going to look at that right now so you get an understanding of that. These are different states that an option can be in. Now, let's say that this red and green bar represents all the different types of value that can be in an option, where the intrinsic value is in red and the extrinsic value is in green. The intrinsic value that we were talking about is figured out by taking the stock price, or the absolute value of the difference between the stock and the strike price. So what does that mean? Let's go back here. Find out the intrinsic value of something. Let's take at 225 the strike price right there, right? And then we'll subtract the actual price of the stock. Right now up here, the last price was 222.19. So if you took 225 and subtracted 222.19, you would get over here. Now they rounded it off by a penny. You would get over here the intrinsic value, which is the difference between it, the absolute value of the difference. And then each one of these listed over here in this column, see, I have it labeled intrinsic, is the intrinsic value, which is nothing more than the difference between the strike price and the stock price. That is the intrinsic value. All right. Let's go back. Now, it's made up of more than just the intrinsic value. There's also the extrinsic value. That's everything on top of it, because options, that intrinsic value is that's the value at expiration. There's also another portion of value that is determined, and it's flexible, called the time value. And when you take the intrinsic plus the extrinsic value, that in total is called the premium, or the actual cost of that stock, or that stock option. Now, that time value can vary dramatically. At expiration, that time value goes to 0. But before that, it has value. And that value, that time value, changes. As a matter of fact, that value changes over time, but it decays over time as you get closer and closer to expiration. And that's what this is showing. It is showing that the whole option price, or this is actually the extrinsic value, is decaying over time until you get to expiration. Now, again, this is showing the intrinsic. I didn't show that. This is the difference between strike and stock price. But that's an important point. That amount of time value, the further away you are from expiration, the time is worth more. So the premium is worth more. But it's constantly degrading as you get closer and closer to expiration, and it speeds up at an exponential pace the closer that you get to expiration. So that's the difference between extrinsic and intrinsic value. All right. Hopefully that's clear to everybody. Not getting any comments. That's interesting. And only 15 viewers. I guess nobody is really interested in options. That's okay. This is all going to go into the archives, so it'll be available for you to look at later. Now, here's some more terms that are very important. One thing that I can say about options, as a general rule, you want to have options that are easy to get in and get out. Get in, get out, all right? And just like stocks, the stocks that have greater volume and more liquidity, more activity in that stock, the easier it is to get in and get out of that stock. You don't have to wait for a buyer because there's probably thousands or even millions of buyers or sellers on the other side of that equation. So it's the same deal with options. With options, and particularly with options, because they're so levered, you want to make sure that the difference between the bid and the ask is very small. There's the bid side and the ask side, and it's the same thing with stocks. And the smaller that is, usually means that there's greater liquidity. Now, not all, in general, that's how it works. Greater liquidity, the smaller the spread between the bid and the ask, the easier it will be to get in and out. And that spread exacts the cost on you anytime you either buy or sell an option. All right, so you would prefer bid-ask spreads that are very small. So we'll go back to this guy here, and you'll see that on both the calls and the puts, you'll see there's a bid column and an ask column. Now, this is Apple stock, and it's very high priced. And in general, the difference between the bid and the ask is 5 to 10 cents for these. There are times where it can be as little as 1 cent, but for such a high price stock, that's pretty good. Some options have as little as a penny between them, and that's because they have a lot of interest in that option contract. So we'll hold that idea there. So the volume is the ultimate determination of liquidity. We want options that are very liquid, and that is the number of shares of stock being traded. So in general, I like to trade options on stocks that have volume greater than 1 million shares traded a day. Sometimes I'd like a lot more. So Stav asks, can you take a step back and explain what is the role of options in the market? The role of options in the market is to control stock. Simple as that. It's to control stock using as little money as you possibly can, and to model your idea of where you think that stock is going to go. All right. And stocks, and options are like this big, like the big board at a horse race. They're laying odds on how what are the odds of it coming into the money or being worth something or not being worth something during expiration. And so this is all a big statistical game. And that's a very, very important point. So thanks for asking that, Stav. Options are a huge statistical game. And so you want to put all the stats in your favor. And one of those things to put those stats in your favor is liquidity. Now, Raziel says, I've seen some people do trading based on open interest analysis. They say it can be more important than volume itself. Have you found any statistical way to trade open interest? All right, so first of all, you don't trade open interest. you look at open interest as an indicator as to whether or not there is higher liquidity. Now, open interest, all that means is that's the number of open contracts in an option series. If you close a contract or exercise a contract, that reduces the open interest in that particular option contract. All right? But open interest really is the ultimate determiner, whether or not there's enough parties in there involved, because you want to make sure that when you're buying something or selling it, that there's enough people with open interest, enough people with other contracts of the same ilk opened, that they haven't exercised, so that there's a greater chance if you wanted to get in or out of that stock, there would be someone that could be matched up with you so you could do that. So that's why open interest is important. But without volume, there's no open interest. If you have zero volume, the chances are there's not going to be any open interest. But that is true, that open interest is an indicator that you can use that's relative to all the other option contracts that are out there. And you can tell whether or not there's sufficient open interest in something that you might want to get interested in. All right? So liquidity is actually the volume and open interest combined. Overall, first of all, you need volume. And if there's volume, then you need interest in that particular option contract. That will determine how easy it is to get in and out of that stock option. The higher liquidity is better. It results in tighter spreads between the bid and the ask price, which means it will cost you less to get in and get out of that option. Also, from a time point of view, if you have a very tight spread and high open interest, you'll get immediate fills. You could even go and do a market order and usually get a fill within, a few pennies. And that's important, especially considering that you're controlling a lot of money with a relatively small amount of money. So liquidity, and so for that purpose, like I said before, we like to trade things that are extremely liquid, So like if you just traded the FANG stocks, you'd be very, very safe. Because there's tons of option contracts. They all have high volume and high open interest for most of the contracts. And you'll do well it'll be easy to execute and also or easy to exercise those contracts. Hopefully that makes sense. So let's go on to the next slide. We're getting through this pretty good. Now, as I said before, there are two sides to the trade. Just like any trade, you get the buyers and sellers. And what it comes down to is rights and obligations. The buyer has the right that is outlined in the contract. He has the right to buy the stock at a particular price, the strike price, by a certain time. So buying a call is bullish. The opposite side of that, the seller, has obligations to fulfill the rights of the buyer. All right, so they're taking the opposite side. The buyer is taking on a call, thinking that things are going to go up. The seller is thinking the exact opposite, thinking, no, I think things are going to go down. So selling a call, even though it is dealing with a long option, selling a call is bearish. For some people, that might be a hard concept to grasp. So buying a call is bullish, selling a call is bearish. So if you were to extend that to puts, buying a put is bearish, selling a put is bullish. So it's the exact opposite. And again, like I said, seller has obligations to fulfill the rights of the buyer. And because of that, the buyer kind of has control over when they buy or get out of or sell that option. The seller only has control when they first sell it. Now, during the life of that options contract, from a seller's point of view, they can get assigned. That's what options assignment is. Now, when an option is in the money, is the only time they can get assigned. In other words, it has intrinsic value. So if you don't have any intrinsic value, you don't have to worry about getting assigned. But during the life of the contract, if it is in the money, at any time you can get assigned. Now, there's only a small chance that it will happen, about a 12% chance. And that chance increases as you get closer and closer to expiration. But you could very well get assigned. Now, if you go to expiration and you're in the money, it will automatically get assigned no matter what. But it's kind of an involuntary thing beforehand. Nothing you can do about it if it happens. And what it will mean is that the clearinghouse will put stock, either long or short, depending whether you sold a call or sold a put, respectively, in your account. And again, it can happen at any time before expiration, and it's completely random and controlled by the Options Clearing Corporation, the OCC. Of course, at the time of expiration, if it's in the money, it's automatic. It will happen no matter what. So you have to decide whether or not you may want to decide to get out of it before it gets to expiration if you haven't been assigned. That way you have a little bit more control. All right. I don't know if there are any questions around that, but what I've done so far is I've given you pretty much all the basics of options. Now, there's more to it. Now, I'm going to show you, some things here, and these are just quick graphs that I created. They're called risk graphs, and we're not going to go over them in detail right now, but what you can see here is that a long call has limited risk. So here's the strike price. The x-axis is the stock price. To the right is up, a higher stock price. To the left is a lower stock price. So if you have a call option, a long call means that you bought it. Then that means that there's a max loss that you can incur, which is actually the cost of the option when you bought it, the price that you paid. That's the amount of money, the maximum amount that you can lose, but it has unlimited profit potential. And there's the strike price. And then there's a break-even price. It's the exact opposite for a put. And then it's kind of the inverse if you sell a call. Difference is whether you sell a call, there's a maximum amount of profit you can make, but unlimited potential loss. Don't let that fool you. A lot of people will tell you unlimited risk, you should never do that. Don't listen to them. Under certain circumstances, it's a very good play. But for the most part, if you don't know what you're doing, I would stay away from doing something like this. It's what they call a naked call. You can also do the same thing with puts. You can sell puts. There's a long put, and then there's a short put. You could have a naked put as well. So if price goes down to zero, you could have, well, it's not really unlimited, but it's probably pretty hefty. And the last thing that we're going to talk about, but we're not going to talk about in any great detail, I'm going to leave it for a future video because it's a whole new topic in of itself. And that this is the option Greeks, and this also goes into the whole model that determines how much of that extrinsic value, how that extrinsic value is actually calculated. Because that is the big variance, the big variable in the price of an option. And there are, and then there's a number of Greeks that also tell you where the price is going and how fast it's going. The delta basically gives you a plus minus view of just how bullish or how bearish it is. And a lot of people use delta to look at all of their options combined, all the different strategies that they have on, and they'll look at their combined delta. And what they try to do is either keep it neutral or near zero, or somewhat bullish if they're totally bullish, or somewhat bearish if they're bearish. But the delta gives you the overall sensitivity of that stock option or the combined all of the options that you may be holding. The theta is the sensitivity to time decay, and it's the amount that an option loses or gains each day assuming the stock price remains the same. So as you know, when we went back, we saw this chart here. We can see that the option, the extrinsic value, is decaying all the time. The theta tells you, from a dollar point of view, how fast that decay is happening. So when an option is way out here and it has lots of time left, the decay is very minor. But as you get closer and closer to expiration, that decay increases. So from the buyer of the option, that's a bad thing. It's against them. From a seller, that's a good thing, because that money decaying is actually going into the seller's pocket. From the buyer, that's going out of their pocket. And Vega, that's the sensitivity to volatility. As I said, volatility is one of the other features, and probably the most significant feature of the price of the extrinsic value on an option. And that can make you or break you. Most people that are into options that don't know what they're doing ignore volatility at their peril. They may wonder sometimes why they took a long call option and the price went up, but the value of their option went down. They thought, how could that possibly be? Options are supposed to be leveraged, and when it goes up, I'm supposed to make tons of money, right? Well, if volatility went down, the premium portion of that option may have shrunk so much faster than the extrinsic value went up. In some cases, you might not have any extrinsic value, and it's all premium. And then that premium value may have disappeared on you. So the volatility is extremely important. And in some cases, it is the #1 thing that we'll focus on. And so Vega gives you the change in price of an option for each 1% change in volatility. The gamma is kind of like the accelerator, an acceleration of delta. Or maybe velocity, maybe the velocity of delta, the change in price, or the change in the bullishness or bearishness. I guess it's acceleration. And it measures how fast the delta can change. Generally, it gets higher as an option approaches the strike price. In other words, it starts getting either more bullish or more bearish if it's going towards or away from the strike price. And it gets lower as it moves from price, it moves away from price, or the expiration is further off into the distance. So as expiration gets closer, it gets higher. All right? So there's everything that you need to know, at least for now, about options. So again, this was the anatomy of stock options. I'll make this presentation available to you. I'm going to put it into the trade room. So this will be part of the ongoing series that I put up there. And by this weekend, I'll have that all settled out and everything. So if you want access to this library of information I'm going to put in there, you have to go to traderofutures.com and then sign up for the trade room, completely free. And that will give you access to this and also access to the Discord group. Right now, it's kind of empty because I'm whipping all this stuff up this week, but get registered now so that you can use this later on. All right. Thank you very much. We'll see you next video.